Olsen on Insights into Consciousness here on A1R Radio, the #1 psychic network on the planet. And I'm here every Tuesday, 1:30 Pacific Standard Time, 4:30 Eastern Standard Time. And I'm always happy to take calls if you call in first and ask for a free reading. Today, though, I'm going to do a teaching show, and I am going to go over something that is really near and dear to my heart because it's the basis of a lot of healing for people. And it's also a spiritual practice that can make somebody really have some great strides in their life when we're speaking of suffering. It all comes down to suffering, and this is the basis of where research through cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy comes from. So there's a clinician's handbook, workbooks, teaching model based upon this research and this spiritual practice, except when we're talking about clinicians actually practicing this, to help a patient with a mental illness, let's say, or with anxiety or depression, they can't use spirituality as a basis most of the time unless the patient initiates that spirituality. And they have to really just chalk it up to, the research behind it and just put it into a scientific model. So I want to just delve into this a little bit because it has been one of the best things that I've ever studied. And it doesn't matter if you have, just basic anxiety, depression, or you would just like more fun in your life, or you would just like to think more positively. It can really apply to anyone on the planet, but it can also do amazing things for somebody, even with, like, let's say a personality disorder or features of a personality disorder, anxiety. Doesn't matter what somebody struggles with, this model can always help, and it can always benefit substantially to the point that somebody's life improves significantly. And then I would like to go over a little bit of information about the next steps after the ego work that I am going to discuss. So first of all, I just want to go into the fact that each one of us has an ego and a shadow side or shadow self, or it's sometimes referred to as a pain body. There's a lot of different labels we have for this. The basis of it is that we have a higher self or a light self and a dark side or a shadow self. And every single person has one, and they can differ in varying degrees. So some people will have very, separated higher self and shadow self. So they come across, the way that I can explain these individuals is that, in my humble opinion, it really is, they do come across as very unauthentic. Sometimes, they seem disconnected from themselves. They seem to be very fake or always overly positive. When you have somebody kind of staring at you and just talking about love and light, and you're kind of worried about their well-being, and if they're connected to this dimension, really, to reality. That can be when somebody is completely disconnected from their shadow side or from things that they really need to look at. And that's why people, kind of describe them as somebody who may be in some denial, which is absolutely accurate. So denial is a great term that, layman's terms, that we use to describe somebody who is in pretty deep denial and is in complete disconnection from their shadow self, which all of us have. And it's usually to the point where they would even deny that they even have this part of themselves that even exists. They want to, follow some narrative that they were taught growing up, or they want to, just not admit it because it would be too damaging to their ego, to their self-esteem, and they're not ready. And that's okay. Everybody's at a readiness stage. And, it's never to put somebody down because they're not quite ready. Sometimes they are still processing things like trauma, or they are emotionally still maturing. Even if someone is a full-grown, mature adult, chronologically, age-wise, physically, they can still be a very young age emotionally. Now, that's not to confuse that with if somebody has a developmental disability or a chromosomal abnormality or difference where they may be a child forever, which happens as well. This is actually emotional intelligence, where if somebody had been through significant trauma at a young age, or they started using drugs or alcohol at a young age, ongoing, and they might have a problem with substance abuse, or perhaps they were not exposed to social situations or people as much as others their age. Sometimes emotionally, a person still does have to grow emotionally. And this is why sometimes, and I love these people. I smile because I just have a love and affinity for all these different sorts of people. That's why sometimes we have, like maybe a rocket scientist who can intelligently put together math and formulations to literally start development of a rocket ship. But if you ask them to, remember where their laptop is, they might not remember much a lot of the time. They might not have those organizational skills that maybe, an adult may have. Or sometimes if you want to be in a relationship with this person who's very intellectually advanced, sometimes all of their intellect went to this intellectual development, maybe in math and science, or their IQ, their intelligence, and it was a bit neglected in the social arena or the relationship arena, where maybe it was all their effort was going to, the intellect, and so they failed to develop as well emotionally. And so this is where I like to point out that can be their shadow side, but usually the shadow side can also be kind of a brat. So sometimes we call it a brat, and it can be a bit spoiled, or the shadow side can even be angry. And it's good to notice that sometimes our shadow side is something that we do not want to admit is part of ourselves. And that is the key here, is that when we get into denial, it's because we don't want to admit that a part of ourself consists of the things that makes up our pain body, our shadow side. This dark side of the moon, there's a dark side of the moon, there's a new moon, and there's also a full moon. And if you kind of liken it unto the full moon and the new moon, where it's light and it's dark, there's balance in all things. There's the sun and the moon as well, which is masculine and feminine. However, I really do believe, that it can also be compared to masculine men would be the sun during the day and the sun at night. So when it goes down, it's the dark side. That's the dark time. Also, the moon is illuminated at the night during the night, and it is, not as visible during the day when the sun's out. So if you think about this kind of amazing contradiction in our universe and our solar system, from our view here on planet Earth, it's quite interesting to see how they complement each other beautifully. So, there's always going to be some way to see an illumination in the sky and to guide us here on the earth at night when it's dark. However, when we have the new moon, think about that for a minute. When we have our new moon, the moon is completely dark. We don't even see the light of the father sun, masculine sun in the sky during the new moon. And this is the time where I believe it's time for us to reflect and go introvert, to kind of go into ourselves and to look at this dark time where it's almost like we're totally alone at that point. And it really is all about us. It's really all about me. It's really all about you, where we're just focusing completely on ourselves and just don't have a whole lot of guidance. It's just all about us discovering ourselves. And in the same respect, we operate the same way as the solar system, and with a partner, whether it be male or female in the relationship, we each have a masculine and feminine energy, and it's really, really complementary if the masculine in one person can balance out the feminine in the other person, just like the sun and the moon balance out our solar system from our point here on Earth. So that's just kind of going really deep into something that I'd like to talk about today. And that's not even as deep as it can go. So I want to talk about the ego and the pain body, this part of ourselves that we are still working on, and we all have it. Sometimes it'll kind of rear its ugly head. And when it rears its ugly head, depending upon how our pain body looks, you could have been traumatized at like 8, 10, 15, something like that, depending upon the age where you were traumatized, or maybe you were just kind of stuck in your development a little bit. it'll come up and kind of rear its ugly head. And now you have a bratty 8, 10, 15-year-old, whatever that may be. And it's time to kind of discipline that part of yourself. But the good thing is that every time this dark side of us comes out or starts to behave in ways that we don't really want or that we don't think serves us, it's a great opportunity to identify that part of ourselves and to really nurture, love, and parent that part of ourselves as if we are our shadow side's parent. Our higher self knows exactly how to parent this shadow side of us, this pain body, this part of us we'd like to hide, sometimes out of shame or guilt or fear or sadness. And the nice thing is that the more that we can get in touch with this side of ourselves, the more that we can accept this side of ourselves, and the more that we can really love and adore and nurture and parent this side of ourselves. I mean, I've even known people who read parenting books on how to nurture and parent their shadow side. So you can go that far. That's okay. No parent is perfect. So we're going to have to do some of this work no matter how our parents looked. Okay. And what I want to look at is how the ego can be very immature and problematic. And it takes our higher self, and I want to talk about how to get a hold of our higher selves within us to do this. But basically, when our shadow side comes out, we are almost like we're changing personalities. You know, if you've ever heard of like personality disorders or like dissociative identity disorder, where people, unfortunately, this is to an extreme. This is pain body or shadow side to a huge extreme. They will switch personalities and they will not have any recollection of it. And that is a real mental health problem where, you know, they have a lot of work to do to kind of get integrated into all these different parts of themselves that are fragmented throughout their psyche and their subconscious. My heart goes out to these people who are suffering from this because it can't be easy. Despite the immense growth that comes from that, it can't be easy. And but what I want to point out is that we're not, all of us, no matter how we behave or if we have personalities popping out or whatever, we all have that aspect of ourselves. And this is what I want to look at today, that we all have fragmented parts of our personality. This is important because we need to learn to identify when our ego is coming out and wreaking havoc on our lives and autopiloting us into a ditch, and when we are aligning with our higher self in the present moment and our guides and angels to better our path and to really serve others and ourselves. So I want to look at something that is a little bit, I don't know, it's kind of a touchy subject, but religion is one of these things that can go awry if we are not in touch with our shadow side, because it's like a double-edged sword. We have these wonderful spiritual people who have come to the earth and have introduced these amazing spiritual practices for other people to benefit from and to teach others. And I think any of us can do that, by the way. I think any of us have that potential. It's not just this person and they're special, or this prophet and they're special because they made it into the Bible, okay? Everybody has that potential with their higher self. And I want to reiterate that, of course, we can learn from other people's experience, and that is the goal, to enrich our lives. However, we all have that same potential if we are able to kind of rein in and lasso in this part of ourselves that can run amok in our lives and derail us from our ultimate journey on our life path and in our timeline here. Our timeline's pretty short, you guys, compared to eternity. And I just want you to know that it's very important that we spend every second of our lifespan doing something productive for our higher learning, to learn to basically do what we need to do in our lives, not be dependent on, just praying and like waiting for it to happen, but being proactive in our lives, meeting with that side of our fragmented shadow side, really getting into where like, okay, how can I parent the side of myself and heal that part? And I don't want to get all, woo-woo with the healing and all that, because that gets too into, drama, and that's not where this is going. And with religion, when we have somebody who's only in touch with their ego side, the shadow side, and religion, it tends to look more like they're lecturing others, they're judging others in reality, and then, following it up with some generic term like, well, I don't mean to be judgmental, just to kind of excuse their blatant judgment, or using religion as a way to be abusive to a child or a spouse, or preachy, with a friend. And really, the whole motivation behind doing this, when somebody is in their ego with religion, is to be superior to someone else, to look better than, to have an image or a mask of superiority or being better than someone. And that's where we get into problems with religion and the ego. However, you have to know, like, when you see these behaviors with someone else and that's an egoic reaction, that that's a very immature way for them to be responding, the goal is to remember that you are dealing with their ego. You are dealing with this shadow side of them that needs healing, that needs love, and needs patience. But you surely do not want to listen to that part of them. It's about identifying that you're dealing with a spoiled brat. We don't know how old this little brat is, no matter how smart they are intellectually. They can be a rocket scientist, remember. However, when the shadow side comes out, it can be as young as 2 or 3 emotionally. We're talking about the emotional intelligence here, like the blatant, just the nitty gritty of like how old somebody truly is at that moment, and to be patient as if you were talking to a child, and to realize that you too have that part of yourself, and other people around you have to be patient with that part of you, that part of me, and that we're all just trying to learn and grow here. We're all just trying to figure out how to manipulate energy and navigate our lives in a positive way to get to our goal, which is really learning to be productive, proactive, spiritual beings in this life. So the way that religion looks with the higher self is it just directly connected to source. And I don't want to get generic with these terms. Basically, it feels peaceful. It's in the present moment. Okay. When we compare the two, the ego and the shadow side in religion, and then the higher self in religion, really it looks like the following. The higher self can be more peaceful, listens well, is in the present moment, is not living in the past or worried about the future. It's more accepting and non-judgmental, but safe, calm, and peaceful. It feels enveloping. It feels warm, loving, peaceful, comforting, safe. When the ego is beginning to stir up in religion and you're kind of feeling like there's like something off, there's not a feeling of peace, but more of a feeling of fear. And then there's more of a feeling of, when the ego is really getting riled up, it feels more like a rushed judgment, or omitting somebody or leaving somebody out because they are this way. It's more of a feeling of fear, it's irritating, it's judgment, it is forced, it's trying to make somebody be a certain way, it's very controlling. And these are all the ways that toddlers are. I want you to think about how is a toddler. If you've never been around toddlers, I would recommend you just watch a toddler at some point. Like if you have a family member or friend with a toddler, watch how they behave. They're literally kind of in every moment impulsive. They're just at a development stage of learning and growing, and they really need guidance. They really need a lot of supervision. You literally have to keep toddlers alive. If they do not have supervision, they could accidentally kill themselves for doing something because they aren't there yet. That's how much supervision they need. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people in power or they just influence people so well. And it's not as though these people with these emotionalities that are so young can't influence people or don't have a high intelligence, because they do oftentimes. And then they're really, it's almost like there's the cult leaders, okay? And it doesn't even have to be a cult. It could be a regular church or congregation or group of people, or even friends or a family. If it feels toxic, abusive, controlling, and really yuck, we're not dealing with a spirituality at that point. You're dealing with somebody who is at a lower level, lower vibration of shame, guilt, and anger. And we're also dealing with somebody who is basically trying to control the masses, but they're about 3 years old intellectual. I mean, not intellectually, but emotionally. Even if their intellect is a lot higher than that, they could have a PhD in, psychology or what have you, and they still have not developed this because of their denial. So it's important for us to be able to identify it, to know your gut reaction, to know how this feels, and to know when we ourselves are in it. It's mostly important for you and I to just discern, to be able to identify when we are in this mode of ego. Ego wants to be better than someone else. It wants to really be all out with the image. It wants to look good. It wants to sound good. It wants to kind of manipulate and get to a point where there's a sense of superiority. And then the real loving, kind, higher self that's connected to source doesn't care about any of that stuff, like at all. I think that it would care more about the suffering of somebody who didn't have enough, and it's more generous and loving and peaceful and kind. And it doesn't, on the other hand, take from, like, let's say a church or a congregation. It's there to serve, serve, serve. And that's another big difference. Anybody can kind of fall and have a hard time and need help, like from a church congregation or people. However, if they really are truly, obviously able-bodied, and they still can't, through many, many years, find the way to be self-sufficient or to come to serve, then we have what is considered somebody who's stuck in their ego every time they're around the congregation or friend group or whatever. And they probably need to have some really strict limits and boundaries. And that's when we're kind of talking about, toxic, parasitic personalities, and how if you're, in a relationship with one or you need to deal with one, it's always good to make sure your boundaries are very, very strict and that you have very, very good boundaries. So it's very interesting how ego is also described as separating the self or the I from the they and the them. So this is also how, you can get into, my religion's better than theirs. They're these types of people. It's you against them. Mm-mm. Or racism. Let's talk about racism. Racism is like, it's I and we against they and them. There's this separation. That's the ego. Superiority, trying to feel better than. It's not just religion. It's also even just, politics. You think you're better than because, and that's okay. Like, people, if they slip into that, but it's really about pulling yourself straight out of that and getting into the present moment and saying, what can I do in this present moment? You feel out of your five senses and you stop and you say, okay, I'm in the present moment. What can I do about my situation that's going to better everything now? Because looking at what happened in the past is not helpful, really, unless you're really trying to figure out what the solution is in the present moment. But being upset or getting a lot of emotional about the past is really the definition of depression. And then if we're thinking or worrying about the future in the present moment, that's the level of anxiety that will cause depression. So if you're constantly worried about what's going to happen in the future, it's taking energy from planning for that future, or really like setting goals, or really, doing something with self-care now to help you feel better. So if you think about ego, it really is just using a separation between the I and me and us against them to feel better or superior. So I really think that it's very, very important to realize that when we are in this I, we against them, it's creating a separation, which actually causes war, by the way. And this is why I like to talk about the ego and fighting. So when we hear about, you want to fight something, and if you're fighting against something, that literally means you have to separate yourself. Your ego is kind of coming up and rearing its ugly head. You're separating yourself from something or someone or an entity where you feel as though you have to gain superiority or battle that or fight it and overcome it. And this is where this becomes very toxic, because I remember Mother Teresa, she's one of my main people that I've always looked up to. And I remember her saying that she would never go to a fighting convention, to fight something. Sometimes, people would invite her to war against war, or fight the war or whatever. And she would decline politely, because she was very clear that she was never a part of something that is going to fight or be against anything, because she understood, as an enlightened spiritual person, a saint, basically, that anything you try to fight is going to get bigger and worse. And anything that you are trying to go against will become so much bigger and stronger that you won't have a battle against it anymore. This is how like frequencies perpetuate the same frequency. It feeds it. It's like you're feeding that energy, and then it just grows bigger and stronger, and then you have a war, a real war. So that's very important to remember, that it happens on a personal level as well. And there is Chinese and homeopathic medicine too, when this is pertaining to diseases, to fight a disease, fight cancer. You can also cure things with like things, like homeopathy fights like with like. It fights anxiety or fear with snake venom diluted, things like that. So there is a solution, and this also works with the ego, to try to realize when your ego is coming out and to remedy that. So I'm going to go. I'm all done for today, but I will see you next week. Have a wonderful week. My website's at the bottom of the screen. It's AnnaOlsenIntuitive.com, and I will see you next week. Thank you.